buddy Crow here, and this is my table rankings for Season 5 of the Pinball Arcade. It's been over a year since I did Season 4 tables, and even since before Season 5 ended, I was getting people asking me, when are you going to do the Season 5 tables? So now I'm finally caught up with everything I wanted to do. Here we are with the Season 5 rankings for Pinball Arcade. Season 5 consisted of 11 tables that were delivered in 10 table packs. All the tables were sold individually except for Fireball and El Dorado, which were sold as a bundle. And incidentally, Fireball and El Dorado are two electromechanical machines which we haven't seen since the release of Central Park in Season 2. Altogether, I feel Season 5 represents a wide variety of tables from the 1970s through the 1990s from Williams, Bally, Gottlieb, Data East, and Sega. And speaking of the rankings, just as before, there's no formula or anything I use to rank the tables. I just played them and then ordered them. It's just totally my opinion based on playing the Steam version of the game. The only problem I have with making these lists is that I can't change them because over time I've had a change of heart on some tables that I've ranked in previous seasons. But I guess there's very little I could do about that. Anyway, let's get on with it. Number 11, Fireball. Here we are at the bottom of the list, and I have no choice but to give this one to Fireball. And it's not like I don't like older EM pinball tables, but rather Fireball has two gimmicks that were novel for its time that I think work against it here. First, there's the spinning plate that's always spinning non-stop and constantly changes the speed and trajectory of the ball, which I can admit can be fun and amusing, but at the cost of removing the skill in playing the table, because it's hard to nudge the table properly when you never know where the ball's going to end up, and the ball often ends up in the out lanes due to the spinning plate. Also, it's difficult to aim for many of the shots because the spinning plate will always change the trajectory of your shots. The other main feature of this table are the zipper flippers. Hitting the blue post in the middle of the table will cause the flippers to move closer together, while hitting either of the two yellow posts will spread them apart. It's a neat feature, but although the flippers moving together will help prevent the ball from draining, the altered position of the flippers also makes it more difficult to aim for certain targets. This table does have a method for obtaining multi-ball, which is cool, but it can also kind of drive you crazy when the balls are repeatedly hitting the blue and yellow posts, causing the flippers to repeatedly move in and out. I know I'm being kind of negative on this table, but there are a couple of positives. The left outlane does have a kickback feature, which does come in handy, and the table does have a fun skill shot to go for. This table is a fun novelty, but other than that, it can drive me crazy when I'm attempting to go for multi-ball or some other predefined goal. Number 10, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This table is unique in that it's the first table in the Pinball Arcade to use the super huge DMD display that Sega had used in a handful of games. The table itself is themed on the 1994 movie of the same name, which was supposed to be a very accurate film adaptation of the original book, but I wouldn't really know about that since I've never read the book or seen the movie. I don't think that would help me rank this table any higher because although there are some interesting features on this table, I just don't like it very much, and I know that will put me at odds with some people because I know this table is rated fairly highly. But one of the main things I don't like about this table is the audio samples. I feel they repeat way too frequently, and while repeating audio samples is kind of a running theme in pinball in general, for some reason this one just irritates me to constantly hear Victor, Geneva, Ice Caves, Who Am I? And so on. Maybe it's just that the dialogue is ripped from the movie and it's played so randomly and so often that it ultimately feels out of place and disjointed from the rest of the table. I don't think the gameplay is that bad, but I will say that the skill shot is terribly easy, and many times the ball will annoyingly head straight for the left outlane as soon as it's launched. I do like the Frankenstein monster on the table as he will interact with the balls by throwing them out in the playfield for multi-ball. And speaking of multi-ball, there are several multi-ball modes which I find fun, including the 6-ball multi-ball. All of the DMD graphics and animations are excellent as well. However, given all that, I just find the overall presentation and gameplay rather lackluster. But I also wouldn't be surprised if I look back on this table in a few years from now and change my mind about it. Number 9, Hurricane. This is the last table in a trilogy of carnival-themed tables that started with Comet, continued with Cyclone, and finally concluded with this table. I kind of have mixed feelings about this table. I remember playing this table fairly frequently in the arcade back in the 90s and liking it back then. But then last year when it was released on Pinball Arcade, I really didn't like it when I played it. But in playing it again, trying to rank these tables, I started to like it again. I guess it depends what kind of mood you're in. If you're in the mood to play some fast-paced pinball, then definitely do not play this table. This is a very slow-paced table, and many of the shots will allow you the time to go make a sandwich before the ball comes back to the flippers. Of course, that's an exaggeration, and it doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing unless you're very impatient. 3 shots in general will slow the game down. The double Ferris wheel, riding the Hurricane because the ball loops around the table, which is more fun to watch in real life than in this video adaptation of the table, and finally whenever the wheel is spun, and that in particular seems to take an eternity. This is a table that certainly takes its time, but I also think it has some fun shots, like the shooting galleries on both sides of the table, and it's always fun to try and dunk the dummy. Activating clown time is also entertaining and isn't as terrifying as it sounds. Given the time, I might want to rank this table a little bit higher, but I couldn't see it going higher much more than 1 or 2 spots.
Thrill, chills, magic, rises.
Number 8, El Dorado. And here we have the other EM machine that was released this season. If this table looks familiar, that's because back in Season 2 there was the similarly named El Dorado, City of Gold, which was basically a solid-state retheming of this table here. If you remember my Season 2 table ranking video, I didn't have a whole lot of good things to say about that table. And I kind of regret that now because that table has grown on me over time, and I'd most likely bump that table up and rank a few spots if I were to redo that list. But as for this table, I like it more than the solid-state version for 2 reasons. The simple art design I think looks better, and I prefer the EM bells and chime sound effects over the digitized sounds of the solid-state game. This table is fun if you're looking to play something simple, yet a little bit challenging, as you'll be focused mostly on trying to knock down the 10 drop-down targets way in the back of the machine, while also trying to nudge your table off in an attempt to prevent the ball from draining. A simple table, but fun nonetheless. Number 7, TX Sector. If there's one thing that really stands out about TX Sector, it's the audio. If this list was only about ranking the audio and sound effects of each table, this table would undoubtedly be at the number 1 spot. The gameplay itself seems to be focused on one gimmick though, transporting the ball. It's the whole theme of the table, but basically from the start of the game, there'll be a shot flashing on the table and you'll be focused on making that shot. Then there'll be some cool sound effects and flashing lights simulating the fact that the ball has transported across the table, and then another shot will flash, and making that shot will do the same, only transporting the ball across the table the other way. And that's about it. I know there are some drop targets and standing targets to increase your energy levels and award bonuses, but the game really heavily focuses on these teleportation shots, and it can get repetitive after a while. Ultimately, I gotta be honest here, I'm ranking this table as high as I am simply because of the table art, but mostly because of the audio effects. Number 6, F14 Tomcat. Do you want a fast-paced pinball game? Well, this is it. This could possibly be the fastest paced table in Pinball Arcade, and it's awesome. Well, if it's so awesome, Why is it only halfway up my list? Well, to be honest, it might deserve to be higher up on my list, but I also have my reasons for ranking tables higher than this one, so it's just where it got settled in. Honestly, part of it is probably because I'm not that good at this table. One of the things that I really like on this table for some reason is the left-hand shot that immediately kicks the ball right back at the flippers. The first couple times you play the game, it can be startling that the game would do that to you, but then it becomes an incredibly fun shot. The audio and visuals are excellent, but then ramped up to 11 once multi-ball starts. It does a good job in making you feel like you're actually fighting against the machine. One of the things I like about this machine in real life is when the beacon lights go off on the back box to show everyone in the arcade that you're being a real badass on this machine. But unfortunately, it's just one of those things that can't be represented here.
Here they come.
Number 5, No Fear, Dangerous Sports. I might get some heat for putting No Fear above F14 Combat in the rankings, but the thing is that No Fear was one of those tables I played a lot in the arcade, and F14 Tomcat, well, not so much. I would consider No Fear to also be a fast-paced table, but also a bit easier. There's a lot of easily identifiable shots to be made, and it's always very clear what shots need to be made, not to mention that the announcer and the skullhead always tell you what to do. Aside from the talking skullhead, the standout feature on this table is the elevated jump shot. There's a ramp that you shoot that takes the ball to the elevated right flipper, and with proper timing, you can hit the ball off a jump where it will come around again at the flipper for another try. This was always fun to do in the arcade, and I would always try to do this even if it wasn't necessary for the event I was playing, just to see how many successful jumps I could get in a row. I love tables that have loop shots like that. One thing I have to point out about this table is that there are no pop bumpers on it. I remember reading somewhere that Steve Ritchie, the game's designer, didn't want the gameplay to be slowed down by pop bumpers, and I always thought that was interesting because I could never think of another pinball machine that doesn't have at least one pop bumper. Let me know in the comments if there is another pinball machine since at least the 70s that doesn't have pop bumpers other than this one.
Do it again. Super jackpot! You're pretty good. What a rush!
911.
Number 4, Rescue 911. This table is just flat out fun to play, and the audio plays a big part of that. Somebody dials 911 and explains the situation, and it's up to you to resolve the emergency with your pinball skills. It's an absolute brilliant premise, and the whole combination of listening to what's going on via the dialogue and sounds really makes you feel like you're involved and promote a sense of urgency that makes this such a fun table to play. I haven't even mentioned the emergency helicopter that flies around the table to pick up the ball, letting you try and drop it off at the proper location. My personal favorite has got to be the husband who calls because him and his wife are out in the wilderness and she goes into labor. The best part about this is when the mission is successful, all the audio dies down for a moment until you hear the baby cry, and that's when you're awarded an extra ball. Man, do I love puns. The only thing that's disappointing about this table is that it's missing William Shatner.
Wildfire rescue. All units proceed to Topanga area.
Number 3, Last Action Hero. I was thinking, do I really want to put this ahead of Rescue 911? And then I played it again and I was like, oh hell yeah. This is based on the movie of the same name, and if I remember correctly, the movie was seen as a failure when it originally came out, but can now be seen as possibly ahead of its time, or at the very least a cult hit. It was basically a parody of the action genre, which starred Arnold Schwarzenegger, who ironically starred in many movies that created a lot of those action movie cliches to begin with. I feel it's important to mention all this because I think it's one of the reasons I like this table so much. There are a lot of references to the movie, naturally, but this table does the same thing the movie does and plays off those action movie cliches as well, and there are a lot of them. There are at least 10 different missions and a few different multi-ball modes, including a 6-ball multi-ball, and since more than half of the bottom of the table is empty, the multi-ball doesn't feel too cramped. There is a crane that comes into play at times, and while it's a bit cool, it's not anything that makes or breaks this table. My only real complaint is that the audio is a bit muffled and not as clear as other tables, but it's probably due to it being like that in the real table as well. The audio could use some restoration, but that's probably unlikely. Number 2, Judge Dredd. How much do I like this table? We'll take everything I just said about Last Action Hero and multiply it by at least 2. Also throw in much clearer audio. This table is thankfully based on the comic books and not the movie starring Sylvester Stallone. And yes, I know that the movie came out a few years after this table was originally released. Not saying a table based on the movie would have been bad, but this table contains a lot of the tongue-in-cheek humor that was noticeably missing from the film, as well as a wealth of references to characters from the comics. There are a ton of game modes, and although you'll play them again and again through multiple plays, they hardly ever get old due to the humor involved. It's also great the way Judge Dredd will constantly be arresting people and sentencing them while you're playing. And if you play long enough, you might even be able to activate 6-ball multi-ball. And as I'm saying this, I just realized that this is the 3rd table this season to have a 6-ball multi-ball mode, and that's kinda crazy. On top of all that, you can start the game in a super game mode, which is kind of the same as the standard game, but with some different rules from what I understand. It seems like every time I come back to this one, I find something new, and it prevents this table from getting old too quickly.
10 million. 10 million.
Just more.
10 million.
Number 1, The Getaway, High Speed 2. I couldn't have put any other table at the number 1 spot. I've probably played this table the most in the 90s, and it's still one of my favorite tables of all time. On top of that, the Pinball Arcade conversion of this table is excellent. The visuals and audio are crisp, and the gameplay is pretty much how I remember it. Okay, maybe the physics aren't 100% perfect, but they're damn close enough for me. There are 2 standout features in this table. The first and most obvious is the supercharger that's present on the playfield. When activated, the ball will accelerate around, accumulating points until it's finally released. It's actually something much cooler in real life than what's presented in the Pinball Arcade, because the machine will slightly rock due to the force of the ball being whipped around in a circle. The second standout feature, and the one I enjoy immensely, even in this digital version of the table, is the fact that you have to shift gears once the tachometer redlines. In the arcade, there was a gear shifter that acted as the ball plunger and needed to be moved to shift gears. But on this version, I usually play with a PlayStation 4 controller, and I find it just as satisfying to use the right analog stick for the same purpose. The audio really helps capture the feeling that you've shifted gears as well. I can't finish talking about the Getaway without talking about multi-ball, which is accomplished by locking 2 balls and then running the red light. The sirens go off, and during multi-ball you've got cops yelling at you to pull over. The only thing that's missing is the beacon light that goes off on the real machine. There are a few more features I could go into, like video mode and Redline Mania, but I don't want to go on forever here. Well, actually there isn't much more I can talk about. It's kind of a simple table in hindsight, but it's one I still enjoy after almost 25 years. If I ever had the opportunity to own this one in real life, I would definitely make room for it.
Dispatch, this is 504. Suspect wearing a red light. Over. Roger, 504. Apprehend him.
And that finishes up the 11 tables constituting Season 5 of the Pinball Arcade. See you all next time.
Forward now.